Is he going to go back to the UFC? So do you have any interest at all in that?
I mean, there's we thought about that, and there potentially that could happen, but in my shoes right now, do I want to go fight 4 more times? No, and then business perspective on their side, it would almost just be like a little farewell kind of deal, 1 or 2 fights. But I'm leaving everything open right now. We're actually talking to Ryzen right now a little bit. They contacted us right away and have some cool things potentially with them. I'm open to, grappling on UFC Fight Pass, any maybe potential boxing deal, fun stuff. I've been a competitor my whole life and trying to be the best at it, from wrestling, collegiate wrestling, getting into MMA, Ultimate Fighter, 20 fights in UFC to Bellator, and my mindset's always been like, go out there, win, go just win, take care of itself, So I want to have something come up where it's fun, where I can go out and be like, this is fun. I got to go, train maybe for one last time for a fight and have that feeling of walking into a cage, and putting the work in to get a result, and that feeling afterwards, that you accomplish something, especially with a win. There's no better feeling, and I miss that. I mean, all of us fighters, you leave that and you can't get that high anywhere else, so going in and fighting another man in the cage or ring or whatever, you get it there. So, I do want to kind of go out on my own terms, basically. And where that's at right now, this just happened. So we'll see.
For the first time in, I guess, about 8 years, he's a free agent again. He just recently parted ways with the PFL. He's also about to become a massive movie star in 2025, starring alongside The Rock and the Smashing Machine. Lots to talk about. It's always a great pleasure to speak to my old friend, Ryan Bader. Ryan, how are you?
I'm great. What about you?
I'm fantastic, man. It's funny when you got that part in the Smashing Machine. I think I may have texted you, but I was like so excited because such a cool project. And I'm sure like Mark Coleman is a really, really good friend of mine. So when you got that role, I was just so excited for you, man. That's awesome.
Yeah, I got a text from the director. I had no idea. He didn't really, say his full name, what he was doing, all that. Was just asking if we had time to, have a little talk, and I had no idea. So I blew him off for 3 weeks, and then we finally got together, and then told me about the premise and the movie, and did a little Zoom audition after that, and ended up getting the part, man. And it was a lot of fun.
Did you ever imagine you'd be an actor? Like when you think back to your college wrestling days, did you ever think you'd be an actor?
No, then, this role is pretty big, a lot of dialogue in that story with Coleman. And, the MMA, the fighting part, obviously comes pretty natural, but yeah, just thrown in the deep end, with, two of the biggest movie stars on the planet, with The Rock and Emily Blunt. And, but yeah, got comfortable and had an absolute blast. And it was fun kind of, making something. I've never been in that world at all. Never been artsy or whatnot, but, along with that, with the whole storyline that's my lineage, the whole wrestling, being a straight wrestler, get into MMA, they kind of pioneered the way. So, it was cool to get in there and, portray a legend like Coleman.
Absolutely. I want to come back to the Smashing Machine, but of course, we all know the news that came out this week, which was you parted ways with the PFL. And I know, from my understanding, just to be clear, it was amicable. There was no bad blood or anything like that. And I know you had said, after you got done with filming, you're like, I have one fight left on my deal. I'm not really sure what's going to happen. Was this just kind of the best outcome, just given where your career's at? And again, you only had one fight left anyway, so it's not, I don't know that you would have stuck around much longer anyhow.
Yeah, exactly. We left. Both left and signed on good terms. It just was probably more my deal. I'm in a position where I'm the Bellator heavyweight champ. And it's kind of weird with them kind of absorbing it and who's fighting, who's the champ, and all that kind of stuff. Then they have their tournaments, And so for me, I just felt like, it's going to be a little while. It's kind of unclear and stuff, and so. Had a good talk with them and decided to go our own separate ways. And when we were happy with the outcome, they were great to us. And, I had an absolute blast with that run in Bellator, look back very fondly on that. So now, we are a free agent. For me, do I need to be fighting, 25-year-olds at 5 rounds and all that kind of stuff? Probably not. I have the skill set, but I'm 41 years old now, so I'm not done per se. I may be, but if cool opportunities, fun fights kind of, come my way, we're definitely interested and that's kind of already started, to be honest.
Yeah, well, let me ask, because I imagine, like, obviously you mentioned PFL, like I know they're doing the tournament. You've done Grand Prix before. Can I imagine you just weren't in a place where you're like, I'm not really in the mood to do another tournament at this point in my career. And to be honest, and this is not a knock on PFL, but like, I don't know what options are really good. You've already beaten so many of the guys they have anyway, and unless they're going to give you Ngannou, which again that would still be a big fight, there just didn't seem to be a lot of great options right now.
Yeah, and I felt like I didn't have, a ton to prove anymore, and for me, like, even like I said, I love my Bellator run. It was so much fun, but even then, we were kind of recycling guys, and I kind of felt that it would just kind of keep going that route, and the tournaments are kind of weird, because, my purse is great money and nobody really wants to pay that multiple times in a year, let alone potentially 3 times in a year. And I get that, and so that wasn't really an option. And I don't know, for me, it'd be like, well, I could get, 3 fights somewhat quickly, then be done, but we had that opportunity to do the movie, that was all summer, and then haven't fought for a while. And for me, it was kind of just perfect timing, it just took away that unknown. Even though I'm in a different unknown, I can kind of steer where I'm going, and so, we're happy where we're at. And like I said, I had a blast, in those organizations, and we'll just see what's next. And I do believe there will be something next, at least one more.
Yeah. It's funny because whenever you hear two people split apart, everyone's imagining there's this huge drama. But again, when I heard they just said it was cool, like no bad blood, there was no ill will or anything like that. And again, like it's such a strange thing. Like it sounded like you had a good relationship with them, and even like them allowing you to go film the movie, like didn't sound like there was any friction there. Like, hey, you got to come fight, you got to do this. Sounds like this is literally just like, you know what, right time, right place. Let's just part ways.
100%. With that movie, they were great. They're like, hey, go do your thing. We'll be here after. And then, I was actually happy. We came to a deal, afterwards, and, they made me happy, and, just one of those things. And I'll always have good things to say about, both those organizations. So, we're all good here.
Can I ask, like, I know that, like, it's kind of, I mean, being honest, it is kind of gone now. We know that Bellator as a brand is done. And I know there was like a lot of weirdness, like, are they Bellator champions? Are they not? But that's neither here nor there. I know you had a great relationship with Scott Coker, and when you were there, it was a blast. You had a great time there. By all accounts, Bellator is now gone. Sadness, like excitement. Like, how do you look back on that? Because when you signed there, it was such a big deal. You were such a big free agent coming out of the UFC, and you could have easily, just stayed at the UFC. You took that chance. You went to Bellator, and I know you love fighting there. And again, I know there's always going to be a little sadness that they're kind of gone. And I know that even though Mike Kogan went over to PFL, it's still different because Scott Coker wasn't there. So like, what was your biggest memory? Just kind of like walking away and knowing like it is kind of sadly Bellator's gone.
100%. And like you said, Kogan's been there and he's been amazing to work with. We trust him wholeheartedly. Yeah, I mean, looking back at the Bellator deal, I came over from the UFC and won the light heavyweight championship first fight. My fondest memory was the heavyweight Grand Prix. I've never fought at heavyweight. Go in there and make it to the finals pretty easily, and then fight Fedor. And I was a light heavyweight champion going in there, and I was trying not to put him on a pedestal. And going out there and get like a 34-second knockout, it was just kind of surreal. And have both belts, your light heavyweight and heavyweight champion. And I'll always look back at, no matter what I do or done at that point in my MMA career, that was definitely the highlight. Just a lot of hard work, grinding through that tournament, fights pretty, quickly spread out, and then doubts in your head, like what happens if I make it to the finals? I got all the way there, but didn't win it, so that was a good time, and I love the people in Bellator too. They're definitely became, big family there. All looked out for each other, and obviously had fun.
And I mean, listen, I know we've talked about the fights many times, but I mean, the fact that you ultimately end up with 2 wins over maybe the greatest heavyweight of all time, at worst, the second greatest heavyweight of all time, where you want to rank Fedor, maybe Stipe. But I mean, you would not have had that opportunity in the UFC because obviously Fedor, we know the relationship that was there. I mean, that is like, again, I know your career is bigger than any 1 or 2 fights, but that's always got to be near the peak. Like, you got to be a guy who beat Fedor. Like, that's always going to be an iconic win.
Oh, 100%. I was a huge Fedor fan, and he wasn't even, close to being on my radar, right? We were in 2 separate weight classes, let alone, he was off doing his thing. And then, we got that opportunity. And when they brought it to us, they were like, hey, would you want to fight a heavyweight if we did a Grand Prix? And I was like, who's in there? Like, we don't know. We said yes, take a little leap of faith. And, my coaches were always like, oh, I think you'd be good at heavyweight, and this and that. So I just did it. And then my first heavyweight bout with King Mo, he wasn't really heavyweight, but Matt Mitrione was, and going in there and be like, okay, I can hang with these heavyweights, and then obviously going in with Fedor, not once, but twice, is definitely, that's something you can tell your kids, all that kind of stuff. And just for myself, being such a big fan and being able to share the cage with them.
Yeah, absolutely. Now, listen, Ryan, if you told me right now, you're like, hey, man, I've done a lot in my career, and I'm just going to walk away. Obviously, I know you work with your gym down there. You got other things going on in your life. I'd say, dude, you build a resume. Like, you got nothing to be ashamed of if you walk away right now and that's the end of your career. But you said, like, there's still opportunities. Now, I'm curious, when you look at the opportunities out there, and the only reason I bring this up, I don't know if you saw the news recently, Jeremy Stevens just recently re-signed with the UFC kind of out of nowhere. Like, he's going to fight in the Des Moines card coming up in a few weeks. And we're like, whoa, where'd this come from?
Yeah.
Opportunity. And I know when you left the UFC, there were no bridges burnt. You just took another offer and went there. Would there ever be an interest in doing that again? Only because now you're a heavyweight. And if I'm being honest, Ryan, I think they could use a heavyweight like you.
Yeah.
Like, that division is not super, super deep. And a lot of the guys that have been there are the guys who have kind of been like lingering in that top 10.
Yeah,
so
exactly.
Would you have any interest in revisiting that? Because that was the first question I got today when I said that. They're like, is he going to go back to the UFC? So do you have any interest at all in that?
I mean, there was we thought about that, and there potentially that could happen, but in my shoes right now, do I want to go fight 4 more times? No, and then business perspective on their side, it would almost just be like a little farewell kind of deal, 1 or 2 fights, but I'm leaving everything open right now. We're actually talking to Ryzen right now a little bit. They contacted us right away and have some cool things potentially with them. I'm open to, grappling on UFC Fight Pass, any maybe potential boxing deal, fun stuff. I've been a competitor my whole life and trying to be the best at it, from wrestling, collegiate wrestling, getting into MMA, Ultimate Fighter, 20 fights in UFC to Bellator. And my mindset's always been like, go out there, win, go just win, take care of itself, So I want to have something come up where it's fun, where I can go out and be like, this is fun. I got to go, train maybe for one last time for a fight and have that feeling of walking into a cage, and putting the work in to get a result, and that feeling afterwards, that you accomplish something, especially with a win. There's no better feeling, and I miss that. All of us fighters, you leave that and you can't get that high anywhere else, so going in and fighting another man in the cage or ring or whatever, you get it there. So, I do want to kind of go out on my own terms, basically, and where that's at right now, this just happened. So we'll see.
Yeah. You said Ryzen. I think they just announced the heavyweight Grand Prix over there. So, I mean, like I said, there's always those opportunities over there, and fighting in Japan is a really cool opportunity. I mentioned the UFC also, again, because obviously you're doing this Smashing Machine movie, and I think I don't know how involved in it they are, but obviously with The Rock being, at least at worst, a part owner in that. I mean, when that movie comes out, like I said, I think Jeremy Stevens coming back, No one would have predicted that a year or two ago. And again, he's going to fight Des Moines. Maybe they do a UFC in Arizona and they give Ryan Bader one last.
Yeah,
it would be a cool way to go out, though, right?
That would. Dave Martin, my manager, and I, we definitely talked about like how cool it would be even to come back for one more fight, and a career there, where it started. And like I said, we're definitely open, and there's a lot of cool opportunities also, with this movie. Even go to the Rise in Japan thing. That's where the same arena is where most of this movie was based, and obviously playing Coleman, he won there and this and that. And, that would be a cool angle too. And the UFC would be a cool angle. So yeah, it's just kind of, like I said, it's pretty new here, being a free agent, and we'll accept some different stuff and kind of put our heads together and kind of where we want to go from there.
Do you have any interest whatsoever in this GFL thing? I don't know how much faith I have in the whole thing. We'll kind of see. I know there's a lot of talk and a lot of guys to sign there. Listen, I want everyone to get paid. I want everyone to find success, but I can't help just being around the sport to have a little bit of doubt. So is that even on the radar at all?
Yeah. I mean, I don't know. I mean, I think it's on every fighter's radar, money wise, but we've been in this sport long enough. We know this sport and people come and go. And I'm not, sitting here talking smack about them or anything, because I don't know. I really do not know. If guys can go in and get, a couple good paydays before, they spend all their money and all that kind of stuff, good for those fighters, but I just don't know the longevity of it at all. But like I said, if you can get in there and get your money and get out before they go under or whatever it is, like I said, I have no idea, who's behind it or whatnot. But I mean, like I said, we're going to look at all the offers, but I kind of have to see like a fight happen with the GFL before kind of entertaining anything with them.
Yeah. Does it feel like where you're at? I mean, obviously, again, even whatever, 40, 41, like you're still, and also the thing is, and let me be clear about this. I think you told me this before, just to be clear, it's heavyweight. There's no more light heavyweight. We're not doing the 205 anymore. Okay.
No, I'm 252 right now.
Heavyweights tend to age better, I guess is the best way to say it. Heavyweight can go longer, but in your mind, is it like one or two in terms of fights? Like maybe grappling you could do differently, obviously.
Yeah.
Grappling, but like one or two more fights, or are you even putting a number on it right now?
Yeah, like I'm not really putting a number. It depends on opponents and opportunities, right? And like I said, do I need to be? I don't want to go in there. I'm going to always be competitive, right? But I don't want to be like, hey, I'm going for another run somewhere for a title or something like that. I'm just looking for maybe one more cool fight. Maybe if for some reason they make you something you couldn't refuse and you do two more, but like I said, my mind frame is, yes, if I have a fight, I'm going to go in there to win, but it's a different mindset than what I had before. It's like, I gotta win this title. I have to keep this title, so, and it's kind of freeing, and obviously, financially it has to make sense and all that kind of stuff too. So, and like I said, we've already had some stuff come across our table that's very interesting, and we have some time and kind of go from there. And this movie coming out, you don't know what you're going to get with that too. Maybe in that side of the business, some opportunities. So we're just kind of wait and see.
Yeah, selfishly, like I said, man, I love the idea, even if it's just one more UFC thing. I think that would just be so cool and just give you a chance. And again, I don't know when. I know the UFC's done a lot of shows in Arizona, but I think that would be cool because I think, like when Dominic Cruz was going to retire, I thought maybe they would do that in Arizona. Obviously, he was going to Seattle. But I think, again, I'm just selfishly saying, like, it would be cool to see you kind of in the crew.
Oh, we've thought about it for sure. That would be super cool, And then, like I said, we're fine. We have a good relationship. I helped Chandler a little bit on the Ultimate Fighter and talked to Danny a bunch over there. So it would be fun to kind of do a full circle and end it there.
Yeah, I remember when you left, going back a few years, I remember like there was no burn bridges. You were never trying to burn bridges with them.
No.
You took a different opportunity. You were never the guy, just like now. Like you're not sitting there saying PFL did this, PFL Bellator did this. No, you left on good terms. So again, you never know what door might open again.
Yeah, exactly. And I owe the UFC a lot. From the Ultimate Fighter, 20 fights there. I mean that was a special time. And that. I look at that as like obviously a huge part of my career, and then I started looking at how many Bellator fights I had too. I was like, holy shit, that was a lot also, I have like 43 fights or something total, but that would be a kind of cool ending to that story for sure.
Yeah. Now, I know you can't get too deep into the movie because it isn't out yet, but can I ask, like, what was that experience? Because you were like, when you started, like, even though, like, I mean, you fought during a time when Mark Coleman was still fighting. And I remember that documentary, the Smashing Machine documentary, which is an incredible documentary for anyone who hasn't seen it. Going into the Pride tournament, Mark Kerr was one of the guys, and it ended up being Mark Coleman who ends up winning. I remember that being part of the big story. They were friends. And Coleman was kind of coming back from the UFC, and he goes in there and wins that original Pride Grand Prix. I think it was 2000 or 2001. So what was it like, just because you lived through a lot of that, and playing a guy? I don't know. I imagine you probably met Coleman at some point or talked to him. And Coleman's a unique dude. Let me just say that.
Yeah.
What was that like? Because you're not playing a guy that you don't have access to. Like, Coleman's still around. Like, he still hangs out. He's still here.
Yeah, no, I talked to him and stuff, and I actually got the producers to fly Coleman out for a day and a half to kind of be on set and watch it, and he's kind of blown away, and Kerr was there a little bit. Yeah, I mean, it was surreal, like I said, the fighting is in my wheelhouse, but we had to go through 2 weeks of stunt training to learn how to kind of sell a punch and make it look like a real punch, and then what's cool is with the fights, we don't do obviously the full fight, but the clips that we do when they're showing those fights, we rehearsed it to make it look like the real fight. We're doing everything that they did, so it was cool. And I got to, some of Coleman's opponents that, they find a lookalike, they were MMA fighters at one point. So I was like, hey, can I give you a little bit? Let's make it look real. And they're like, hell yeah, and so it was a lot of fun. And man, you're shooting those scenes, those fight scenes, and some of them we were there for 7 hours, getting after it. It was tough. I'm not saying it's tougher than an MMA fight, but, a lot of work was put into it. And then, going into the dialogue scenes, I talked to Benny Safdie, the director. I was like, hey, do I need to get an acting coach or anything? He's like, nope. He's like, I'm your acting coach. I want you how you were in your audition on Zoom. He's like, just show up ready. So it was pretty crazy. Just not my world, right? Just show up and there's 80 people in a room, cameras, and they're like, all right, you guys want to try one? And then you just get after it.
Were there nerves at all? Because they asked you to do a fight scene, even if you're just trying not to actually punch Alexander Usyk, who I also know played Igor Vovchanchyn, which is awesome.
Yeah.
You're standing next to Dwayne Johnson, one of the biggest maybe the biggest movie star in the world, Emily Blunt, who is an Oscar nominee. Like, that's did you get nerves, or did you just have to be like, I just got to go do it? Like,
yeah, I get nervous for anything. And so, yeah, especially that first one, it was like a pretty big scene, my first dialogue scene. And like I said, you're in a house, there's a bunch of people there, everybody's looking at you. You've never done this before, and it was like, all right, let's go. But after I felt comfortable, did well in that one. And then after that, felt pretty comfortable. It's something new, right? I've never been in that position. And so you start doing it over and over again. The fight scenes were great. We're in our fight shorts, we're in the ring, choreographed it already, and those were in my wheelhouse, and those were fun. Yeah. But the kind of the weird, different part was, all right, you're in a room, and you have 10 lines, and you're going back and forth, with The Rock. It's pretty surreal, but felt like we all did really well, and I'm excited about it for sure.
And just, again, this isn't a spoiler by any stretch of the imagination. No. I've seen the movie, but Coleman was a big part of that life, like a big part of Mark Kerr's life. So when I saw you got the role, I was like, that's awesome. Cause you kind of imagine like you're going to get a bit part, you're going to go in and get to do the action scenes, the fight scenes, but play Mark Coleman, and for people who haven't seen that documentary, Mark Coleman was a huge part of Mark Kerr's life during that time. So it's a pretty big part of the role, man. That's awesome.
Oh yeah.
You gotta be kind of geeking out about it.
What's that?
I said, you got to be kind of geeking out about that.
It's crazy, and it follows that documentary, pretty well, and it doesn't deviate too. It takes liberties here and there, but kind of what you see in that documentary is it's kind of true to form, and so Coleman's in, like kind of that last half of that deal, and so Yeah, I'm just honored that I was able to get that part and represent a guy like Coleman, you know, and hope I did it justice.
Can I ask, like, I know this is kind of like a first experience and the movie's coming out, but I mean, again, for people who don't know, like A24 is a massive major studio, Oscar-winning studio. A lot of buzz around this one. Obviously, Benny Safdie has been nominated before Oscars, things like that. Having this one taste, I know it's one movie, but like, would you have interest? Because we've seen athletes cross over and become, you know, I mean, in a way, The Rock. I know he played football. He was a professional wrestler, which is already kind of acting. But I mean, look at the career he's built. So, did you have enough fun doing it to say maybe you would continue pursuing this later on down the road?
Yeah, I mean, I would do some other stuff. You know that. Yeah, it depends on the opportunities, right? I'd love to do kind of a more like an action kind of film, like either a military deal or whatever. Feel like I'd be a good fit, you know, with that. But yeah, just going through that whole process. Like I said, I'm not an artsy guy. I've never like been a part of like making something. And so it was totally new from my point of view. And, you know, to be a part of that and kind of see, you know, a little bit as it goes and how it's all put together, it was definitely super cool, you know, and you never know how you're doing while you're in there. You know, some directors you may, but our director, he's so nice and all that, said, hey, you're doing a good job. But I'm like, am I? You know, but then you have Emily Blunt, like, hey, you should stay in this business. You're good, this and that. You know, kind of gives you a little ego boost a little bit. And it's like, maybe I can, you know. So, yeah, like I said, right now we're just all about kind of seeing what's out there and opportunities. And, yeah, I'll do another one for sure.
I've seen enough of your prank videos to know you can do comedy, too, if you wanted to. So.
Yeah, there we go.
Well, Ryan, I tell you, you're in a good spot. Obviously, like I said, options are out there. Whether it's rising, grappling, you know, my preference would be doing one more the UFC, whatever the case may be. Obviously, there's still options out there. And I tell you what, I am jazzed. I'm super excited for the Smashing Machine to come out later this year. I'm going to be sitting there like a nerd just watching that whole thing because I actually know the guys in the movie.
Yeah, it'll be fun. It'll be a fun movie.
Yeah, so I appreciate you always taking the time in. Obviously, I'm sure we'll talk whatever the next thing comes about, whether it's Rise or whatever, I'm sure we'll talk about. But thank you for jumping on me, Neo. I appreciate it. And, man, as always, can't wait to see what's next.
Hey, my pleasure, buddy. Appreciate it. I'll talk to you soon.